In Dr. Bailey's book, and we will talk about Dr. Bailey soon and your work with in dealing with that. One of the things that he talks about is that he can tell by looking at somebody, like his gaydar is strong, so to speak. Okay, and he also talks about correlates between, let's say, being an effeminate young boy and predicting how they are going to develop later in life as as a homosexual or as a gay man, and I want to ask you about this. Okay, we spent so many years historically in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years at least, maybe mostly since the 70s, trying to tease apart the idea of sexual identity, gender identity, sexual orientation, like all these different facets that used to always kind of get lumped in together, right? It was just this one monolithic construct, right?
Right.
So we spent all this time teasing it apart. But now, what I'm curious is if, as Dr. Bailey says, there are, let's say, correlations between someone's behavior and presentation, let's say as a child, whether a young girl who looks kind of tomboyish or, boyish, has a better chance of becoming a lesbian or bisexual, or not, I shouldn't say becoming, but identifying as they get older, right? Or a boy who's more effeminate might identify then as a gay man as he gets older. A couple of things. One, do you believe that these correlations are as strong, let's say, as J. Michael Bailey suggests? And two, if they are, do you think there's anything wrong with acknowledging these correlations, even if they're not politically correct?
So Bailey would point out, and I would point out, that the data is weaker with regard to girls, that being butch means you'll grow up to identify as lesbian. It's stronger with regard to males. And then maybe partly because we've studied boys more, but it looks like females are more unpredictable in terms of sexual orientation, and also more flexible in terms of sexual orientation, it appears.
Yeah.
So we know from cross-cultural studies, so I've published on the work of anthropologists who've looked cross-culturally, we find in multiple cultures that there are systems set up for boys who are very femme to enter into a third gender category in which they'll be raised as girls and they'll identify as women. Their bodies aren't changed at all, but they end up having sex with men. So they ultimately culturally are identified as straight women. And what that suggests to us is that there's a sort of consistent biological category across many populations in the human population, where there will be some males who are naturally quite feminine in terms of behaviors and interests. That is to say, more correlating with what girls are into and doing. And that in those cultures, they will be shifted over and they will grow up to be androphilic, in other words, attracted to men. They'll grow up to be straight women culturally, but they're having sex with men. In this culture, the way that gets sorted out, we have a different civilization culture than they have as a civilization culture. Ours creates a category of gay men, and gay men end up having sex with other gay men and having relationships with other gay men. But what that suggests to us is that there probably is a biological component that connects gender identity and sexual orientation in some cases. And it seems to be, again, stronger in the male population than in the female population. Right. Are we not supposed to talk about that? I think it's kind of silly not to acknowledge that it exists, because it helps us understand human life, but it also helps us understand the experience and allow for the experience of a lot of gay men, which is, if we look historically, a lot of gay men will in fact indicate that this was their experience, that they were more feminine typical as boys than were the boys who grew up to identify as straight. So, there's a whole website before marriage equality was finally achieved in the United States. There's a big website called Born This Way. Right. And the whole point of Born This Way was specifically to say, I was queer from the start, right? I was gender atypical from the start. I was sexually different from the start, and that's fine, and get out of my face, because that's the way I've always been. So it's funny to me that this pendulum has swung, where for a while, if we talked about this, we were supposedly eugenicists and we were going to be interested in eliminating all gay people from the population. And now it's, how dare you question the fact that I was gender different as a child, because that was proof that I was going to grow up to be lesbian, bi, gay, whatever. So my feeling is we can talk about this stuff and we can recognize these are correlations. So there'll be some kids who are gender skewed, we could say, as children, who will still grow up to be straight people. It's all over the place, and I don't see why we can't talk about the fact that there are patterns. There are certainly patterns in the world that exist, and the patterns tell us things. But right. They don't tell us everything. And especially for females, they don't tell us everything, because females seem to have, like I said, more flexibility and more unpredictability in terms of orientation.
Right. And that's why when I was talking with Dr. Bailey about his work using plethysmographs, not just self-report, trying to understand what's really going on. And of course, there's troubles inherent in that work as well. But the fact is, nobody should be targeted for trying to better understand what the heck is going on, because we don't know 100%. You know, grab a million people, you're going to have, several 100,000 different experiences, if not a million experiences. So we can't simply say, this is how things are. But people, of course, sometimes don't like to hear the messages or the implications of the message. So then they, attack a person's motives, try to say that they are, as you say, a eugenicist or something like that, or transphobic, homophobic, take your pick.